Welcome to Meet a Revolutionary. Today, we're going to be sitting down with Daniel.
Daniel is a professional cyclist, a law student, and an advocate for representation in cycling. Racing has taken him across North America, and as of this spring, Europe, as he aims to bring more diversity into the sport.
Let's meet Daniel.
Hey Daniel, how are you?
Good, how are you guys?
Doing well, thank you. And thank you so much for joining us today for Meet a Revolutionary.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Can you tell us about when you first fell in love with cycling?
I first fell in love with cycling during my time at law school. I used cycling as kind of an outlet for physical activity to just remove stress and kind of refocus. But that kind of refocus and stress relief turned into a snowball effect and ended up loving the sport and wanting more out of the sport. And the only trajectory was to just train more and end up racing.
And how did you first kind of get involved? Like, what do those first steps look like?
I've been very fortunate enough to work in the cycling industry before I went to school. So I was always kind of in it, but I never took it seriously enough to race. And then as I wanted to take it more seriously, there were people in my life that helped me get to the point where I am.
And you've spoken in the past about wanting to outride racism. What does that mean to you?
Outriding racism and discrimination for me means just making sure that the space is available for everyone. Showing up at races, it's not uncommon to be the only person of color in 120, 140 people peloton. So just making sure that the space is open to everyone. So if you do want to race and you do want to get into that situation, that you don't feel like you're out of place.
So in your work, you've spoken a lot about the barriers to entry that happen within cycling. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so it's not unheard of that cycling is a pretty expensive sport. It's a very high barrier to entry. Just the gear alone costs thousands of dollars. So what happens is if people don't have the means and the funds to sink that money in right off the bat, they don't have the chance to experience the sport.
Right. And I imagine that these barriers to entry definitely impact representation and equity in the sport. Can you tell us why representation matters in sports?
I think representation in sports is important because seeing someone that looks like you achieve something that at one time may seem impossible, I think that makes things become a lot easier for people to grasp.
Absolutely. Were there individuals that you looked up to?
Yeah, in this journey of cycling, right off the bat, there's not many people that look like me or even us for that matter. So there's an American named Justin Williams who is performing at the professional level domestically in the States, and he's someone I've definitely gravitated towards trying to navigate my way in this space.
Absolutely. Representation and role models, right?
Exactly. So I think it's important to remember that you've put in the work, the miles, and the dedication, and you belong to be there. Even if you're the only person that looks like you in the race, you still own a space in that race.
Absolutely. And from there, it's about being perhaps the only that time, but working to get more people who look like you to the starting line next time, right?
Exactly. If I can inspire others that look like me to want to race their bike and perform at a high level, then I think that means more than winning any race.
So Daniel, you have been advocating for equity and representation within cycling. How can cycling be used as a vehicle for change?
I think just bringing more awareness to social events through the sport of cycling and dedicating certain aspects and races and performances towards social events and getting the conversation started. I think that's where it can be definitely a vehicle for social change.
And at Revolutionary, we really always speak about the power of dreams, and we say dreams fuel revolution. So I'd love to hear from you. What is your dream for cycling?
I think my dream for cycling is to see more diversity in the professional peloton and seeing more people from different walks of life get to experience and enjoy the sport of cycling, because I truly think it's a beautiful sport that everyone should be able to experience.
Couldn't agree more. And I think that with that outlook, the future of cycling and racing can be a bright one. I'm curious though, you are a law student, a professional cyclist. How do you balance it all and make time to recharge and prioritize your mental health?
I think for me, it's just a matter of disconnecting every now and then. Definitely things can be overwhelming with school and with also performing at a high level. And I find that there's times where I hate my bike and I don't want to ride. But it also feels like the more I spend time away from my bike, the more I fall back in love with it and realize how much I love the sport.
You spoke about how cycling can be tough. It can sometimes be cutthroat. Have you ever had any experiences where you felt othered in cycling?
Yeah, cycling is one of those sports where it's extremely hard. It's not only hard physically, but it's also hard mentally, and it's taxing on the mind. And I've definitely had probably my lowest moments as well as my highest moments in the sport. And there's been times where you kind of want to quit and never want to ride a bike again, but it definitely teaches perseverance and just getting through things.
In what ways have you leaned on your team or your community to really foster that resilience?
I've definitely had to reach out to people in low times and kind of recenter and refocus on why we do this and why we want to sit 6 hours on a bike and why we want to ride around in races. So it's definitely nice to speak to other people that are similar minded and are going through the same things with the sport and other aspects of life as well.
Absolutely. And you mentioned that cycling can be a vehicle for positive change. You've certainly demonstrated that. What would be your advice to other people who want to make a difference, who want to make their voices heard, but perhaps don't know where to start?
I think it starts with little things. I think it doesn't have to be a massive polarizing event that make change. I think just small aspects of changing your daily life that may inconvenience you or may not, but just starting small and snowballing into something that's bigger.
Yeah. And what would some examples look like based on your experiences?
For me personally, I think what my biggest thing was when I see someone on the road that may be riding alone or maybe riding with other groups, just to make sure that I acknowledge them and say hello and try to be as friendly as possible and make the space as open as possible. The one thing about cycling that's different than other sports is professionals share the same roads as people that are the first time riding their bike. So it is important to make sure that everyone feels welcomed in the sport.
Daniel, thank you so much for joining us today for this incredibly inspiring conversation. Before we close out, we'd love to know how others can support the cause that you care about.
Others can support the cause that I care about by supporting the GLE Movement. The GLE Movement is a non-for-profit community-based program that donates bikes to children that have never owned bikes. So to want to race a bike, in my opinion, is you have to ride a bike to know that you do want to race it. And there's tons of kids that have never experienced bike riding. So just having more kids on bikes is important for me. And I think it also helps the community a lot.
I love that. Amazing. So much about equity is really about access. And it sounds like the GLE movement is doing exactly that when it comes to cycling. So thank you so much, Daniel, for spending time with us today.
Thank you.
To learn more about Daniel and support his cause, head to revolutionary.me/Daniel.
And stay tuned for more episodes of Meet a Revolutionary.